When a tree fails a few years after planting, most people blame the species. But experienced arborists know the truth. The success or failure of a tree often begins on the day it goes into the ground. Installation practices are one of the most critical phases in the life of an urban tree. Done correctly, planting sets the foundation for decades of healthy growth. Done poorly, it can create structural defects, root problems, and long-term stress that may never be corrected. For arborists preparing for the BCMA exam, understanding the science and technique behind tree installation is essential. These concepts appear regularly on certification exams, but more importantly, they show up every day in the field. In this podcast, we are going to walk through how trees move from nursery production to the landscape. We will explore planting site evaluation, planting techniques, root system preparation, and early structural management. Along the way, we will connect these installation decisions to long-term tree stability, structure, and health. Let's start before the tree ever reaches the planting hole. The first step in successful tree installation is species and stock selection. Arborists must consider site considerations carefully. The planting site determines whether a tree thrives or struggles. Think about soil conditions, sunlight, water availability, and surrounding infrastructure. Urban trees often grow alongside hardscape like sidewalks, curbs, and buildings. In these environments, soil compaction is common, and rooting space may be severely limited. A planting site also needs to meet design criteria. In landscape design, trees are chosen not only for survival, but also for landscape function and functional value. A tree may provide shade, stormwater interception, visual screening, or contribute to green infrastructure systems designed to manage runoff. An alley of evenly spaced trees along a boulevard is a classic design feature, but installing a large monoculture of a single species can be risky. If a pest or disease targets that species, the entire planting may fail. That is why arborists must understand the differences between native species, exotic species, and introduced species. Some introduced species become naturalized species that coexist without major ecological disruption. Others become invasive species that outcompete native vegetation. Tree selection also involves understanding genetics. Nursery trees may be propagated from clones, cultivars, or varieties selected for particular traits. A cultivar might be chosen for its growth rate, heat tolerance, mature height, or growth habit. Habit describes the natural form of a tree, whether upright, spreading, or weeping. Understanding habit helps arborists predict structure and space requirements. Another important genetic factor is provenance, which refers to the geographic origin of the seed source. Trees from northern provenance may have better cold hardiness, while southern sources may perform better in warm climates. In grafted trees, two plant parts are combined. The scion forms the upper canopy, while the rootstock provides the root system. The nursery plant itself is often referred to as stock. Now let's talk about the different ways trees are produced and sold. Trees may be bare root, balled and burlapped, B&B, container grown, containerized, or in-ground fabric bag grown. Bare root trees are harvested without soil around their roots. They are lightweight and economical, but require careful handling to prevent root desiccation. Balled and burlap trees have a root ball wrapped in burlap and often enclosed in a wire basket. The root ball contains field soil and most of the tree's roots. Container-grown or containerized trees are raised in pots filled with a specialized growing medium. These trees are convenient to transport, but may develop circling roots or become root-bound if left in containers too long. In-ground fabric bag-grown trees are grown in permeable fabric containers placed in the soil. These systems encourage a dense root mat within the bag. Regardless of production method, the size of nursery trees is often measured using caliper, which refers to trunk diameter in younger nursery stock. For larger trees, arborists measure diameter at breast height, commonly called DBH. When trees are harvested from the field, techniques such as stage digging and root pruning may be used months in advance to stimulate new root growth inside the future root ball. Once the tree reaches the landscape, planting begins. The planting hole, sometimes called the planting pit, must be prepared carefully. The planting hole should be wide enough to allow roots to expand outward easily. The depth is critical. The trunk flare, where the trunk widens into the root system, must sit at or slightly above the finished soil grade. Planting too deeply is one of the most common causes of tree decline. Before placing the tree in the hole, arborists should inspect the root system. In container trees, circling roots should be corrected to prevent future girdling root problems. A girdling root forms when a root grows around the trunk and compresses vascular tissues. Over time, this girdling can restrict water and nutrient transport. Root ball preparation may include slicing or loosening compacted roots. In severe cases of root-bound systems, significant root pruning may be necessary. Once the tree is placed correctly, backfill soil is returned to the planting hole. Ideally, the backfill consists primarily of the native soil removed from the hole. Some planting guidelines once recommended adding large quantities of soil amendment to the backfill. However, research has shown that heavily amended backfill can discourage roots from expanding into surrounding soil. In certain cases, amendments may be incorporated into the broader planting site, rather than just the hole. Arborists must also watch for drainage issues. A perched water table can form if water collects in a poorly draining planting hole, surrounded by compacted soil. This can suffocate roots and slow establishment. After planting, mulch is applied around the base of the tree. Mulch conserves soil moisture, moderates temperature, and reduces weed competition. But mulch must be kept away from direct contact with the trunk to avoid decay and pest problems. Now let's talk about stabilizing the newly planted tree. In windy locations or loose soils, staking or guying may be required. A guy is a support line that stabilizes the trunk. Guying systems must allow slight movement so the tree can develop trunk strength. Overly rigid systems can weaken the tree. Improper installation can even cause girdling injuries if support materials rub against the bark. Staking and guying should always be temporary and removed once the tree becomes established. Some planting sites may also include protective devices. A tree shelter may be installed to protect young trees from browsing animals or mechanical damage. In colder climates, arborists may use tree wrap to protect thin bark from winter sunscald or frost crack. Frost crack occurs when rapid temperature fluctuations cause the bark to split. Another product sometimes used is an anti-transparent. Anti-transparent coatings are designed to reduce water loss from leaves during transplanting stress, though their effectiveness varies depending on environmental conditions. Speaking of transplant stress, let's discuss transplanting and establishment. Transplanting inevitably causes root loss. The root ball contains only a portion of the original root system. As a result, the canopy often demands more water than the reduced root system can supply. This imbalance leads to transplant shock. Symptoms may include leaf scorch, reduced growth rate, early leaf drop, or dieback. The goal of early care is to help the tree establish. Establishment means the tree has regenerated enough roots to support normal canopy growth. Water management is critical during this period. Fertilizer is usually not necessary immediately after planting, unless soil testing indicates a deficiency. Sometimes trees are moved using a tree spade, a large mechanized device that extracts and transports trees with a conical root ball. Even when using a tree spade, proper site preparation and aftercare are essential. Once the tree is planted and stabilized, structural development becomes the next priority. Young trees benefit from structural pruning. Structural pruning guides the tree toward a stable architecture that can resist wind and storm damage later in life. Many shade trees naturally develop a central leader. The central leader is the dominant vertical stem. Competing leaders may need to be subordinated through pruning. To subordinate a branch means reducing its growth potential relative to another branch. As the tree grows, permanent branches begin forming the long-term canopy structure. These permanent branches should be well spaced along the trunk and attached with strong branch unions. Temporary branches may be allowed to remain lower on the trunk during early years to help increase trunk taper and protect bark from sun exposure. Eventually, these temporary branches are removed as the canopy rises and clearance requirements increase. Clearance refers to the vertical space needed above sidewalks, roads, or structures. Proper clearance management is essential in urban forestry. Scaffold branches form the primary structural framework of the canopy. These scaffold branches should be distributed radially around the trunk to create balanced architecture. The position and strength of scaffold branches influence the long-term safety of the tree. Now, here is an important diagnostic perspective. Imagine you're inspecting a young tree 5 years after planting. You notice the trunk flare is buried below grade. The tree has poor growth and declining vigor. Digging near the base reveals circling roots and possibly a developing girdling root. This situation often traces back to installation practices. The tree may have been planted too deeply, with unresolved root defects. This is exactly the type of field scenario that experienced arborists must recognize. Understanding installation practices helps arborists diagnose long-term structural and physiological problems. Here is an exam insight worth remembering. Certification exams often test the difference between planting depth issues, root defects, and establishment failures. Understanding the relationships between trunk flare position, root ball preparation, and transplant shock can help you identify the correct answer. Before we wrap up, let's connect the major concepts from this chapter. Successful planting begins with species selection based on site considerations and design criteria. Arborists must understand nursery production methods, including bare root, balled and burlapped, container grown, containerized, and fabric bag grown stock. Proper planting techniques involve preparing the planting hole, positioning the trunk flare correctly, managing backfill soil, and preventing root defects like circling roots and girdling roots. Mulch, staking, and guying provide early support, while protection systems such as tree shelters and tree wrap help reduce environmental stress. During the establishment phase, arborists monitor transplant shock and ensure proper irrigation while avoiding unnecessary fertilizer use. Finally, structural pruning guides the development of a strong central leader and properly spaced scaffold branches that will support the tree throughout its life. Installation is not just about putting a tree in the ground, it is about setting up decades of healthy growth. In the next chapter, we'll explore plant health care, the systems arborists use to monitor tree health, diagnose pest problems, and apply integrated pest management strategies. And once you understand how installation affects root systems, structure, and long-term stability, you will start seeing every newly planted tree through a much more informed arborist lens.
Thanks for listening to the Arborist podcast. Let's keep building your arborist knowledge one domain at a time. If you found this useful, please like and subscribe.